Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 14th of October, comes to you from London. And here I'm using the Updata system, tracking the markets again. Just a quick look at my watch list here. We see most currencies are falling against the dollar this morning. US markets were fairly strong on Friday. We're seeing European markets down this morning, and Asian markets mostly up. So a little bit of a mix of things that are going on. You see the dollar actually just rising, as we said. That's up 0.2% this morning. The euro against the dollar is actually therefore falling. We're still bullish on that short-term chart. Remembering this is my long-term, my medium-term, and my short-term. Lots of downside targets still hanging over us. So we do expect the euro to go weaker versus the dollar. The yen. We're seeing the dollar is actually down slightly against the yen, although it's holding its bullish trend here. And sterling is falling back after dramatic rises on Thursday and Friday. We're down 0.5% this morning against the dollar, and against the euro down about 0.25%. So still holding on to the gains on the hopes of a deal with the European Union, so for Brexit. Against the Swiss franc, sterling is down about 0.4%, but again, these medium-term cross is quite significant for sterling. We are now entering a new medium-term uptrend generally. Bitcoin sitting steady at $8,300, just slightly in the doldrums on the short-term chart. We do have a new downside target of $7,500, so that's 9% lower. Looking at the S&P 500 index, where we were up 1% on Friday, and we're into short-term bullish territory again. So the market's actually looking a lot better. The NatGas was in the day before into short-term bullish territory. So we are just seeing now the US stock markets actually starting to look good. We've not broken resistance, but we are back into positive territory on the cloud charts. The Russell 2000 being the exception. We're still bearish on the long and medium term charts, but the short term chart has also moved to bullish. The futures this morning, we're seeing the S&P future down 0.8%, the Nasdaq E-mini down 0.14%. Not enough to really say which way the markets will open at this stage of the day. So our call is flat for the opening in the US. The FTSE 100 index down 1/3% this morning, but it has moved into bullish territory on the short-term chart. Unlike the US markets, though, we are still in bearish territory, medium and long-term. And the mid-caps have actually surged this morning, but we saw here we're still sitting in bullish territory on the short-term chart, but long-term we still have work to do. The DAX this morning we're seeing here is also down 0.5%, and the CAC Quarante down 0.6%, but in bullish territory on all three timeframes. Japan was up nearly 1% overnight. We said Asia was pretty strong all round. The Hang Seng was up almost 1%. It's now short-term bullish as well, and the Shanghai Composite was up more than 1%. And it's starting to look more and more bullish as well, just nudging that resistance level on the long-term chart, medium-term looking pretty good. So markets generally starting to get through the October blues and are looking better. Remembering, of course, it's a US holiday today, so be maybe quite quiet in the US. Sensex we're seeing is quite strong, and the S&P 500 index, the Aussie index, up 0.5%. Brent crude is down this morning below the $60 mark again. Still bullish on the short-term chart, but the medium and long-term charts dominate bearish, and the same for US WTI as well. US NatGas sitting at $2.28, just starting to make a little bit of a transition there. Gold stuck below that $1,500 mark this morning, just sitting at $14.89. So we are bearish in the short term for gold, and we're seeing silver much the same move there. US 10-year yields sitting at 1.73%, so holding on to the gains we saw last week. And that, of course, means that bond prices are falling, and German bond prices starting to look bearish on the short-term chart. Medium term, we're at risk of wandering into a new bear trend there for it as well. Looking very much like a head and shoulders here, potentially. So it may be an end to the move in the bond markets. Looking at individual stocks now, we start by looking at the international. This is all coming from Yahoo Finance. We see here a mix of green and red. Europe is mostly red, and then we see that we are bullish on most of the Asian markets. The Dow on Friday, we saw some pretty big performances, nearly 4 and 5% there. Caterpillar, Dow Inc., 4.65% for Caterpillar. Not enough to really turn this chart round, and we see here the relative trend is lower. On the downside, we have McDonald's. They were down 1.3%, but only 4 Dow stocks were down. It was a pretty strong day all round, and we can see the McDonald's trend is pretty bullish on all of those charts. Looking at the NASDAQ 100, we saw some big performances in the Dow, of course, some even bigger ones in the NASDAQ. Fastenal were up 17%, Wynn Resorts up 6%, AMD up 4.8%. So we're seeing some really big jumps there. Looking on the downside, we only had 4 stocks down. Mondelez International, they were down 1%. But the chart's still holding on and looking pretty good, and that relative trend is just amazing. Taking a look at the Aussie market now, overnight, we had CYBG, they're up 12%. Not enough to change the picture though on this chart, still pretty bearish. And if we look at the bottom performer, we had Saracen Minerals, they were down 8%. And Regis Resources, they were down 5%. That chart's starting to break down, as is Regis as well. The Nifty 50 in India, we saw Tata Motors topping the table. They're up 6%. Quite a big move there, but not enough to change the picture on this chart. And if we look at the downside, here we see the live pricing coming from Yahoo. Infosys was the worst performer, down 3.7%. And that chart's still holding on to its bullish trend. Looking in Europe now, first of all, we start with the UK market. The best performer in the FTSE 100 is WPP. They're up 2.7%. They had a pretty torrid week last week, and that is starting to look like a medium-term breakdown. Recovery was underway, but looking like it might be back to where we were. Sage up 1%, so the stock actually just struggling here on that short-term chart, and we see this breakdown on the relative is really clear there. Not many stocks up in the FTSE 100, and if we look at NMC Healthcare, they're down 3.8%, so heading lower there. Looking at the 250, we have got Sophos Limited. They're up 36% this morning, so that's a massive jump. So putting them clearly back into bullish territory. And on the downside, we've got Into Properties. They're down 7.5% this morning. So continuing their fall. I think that bearish trend just terrible. Last of all, we take a quick look at Europe this morning. So we've got a series of stocks up. We see Adidas up, they're holding on to their trend, and Eurodollar up 0.5% as well. On the downside, again, a sea of red in Europe this morning. Oil majors been hit quite hard. Total down, they're over 1%. So that chart looking a bit bearish as well. So the picture in Europe is fairly bearish. As we say, we're probably going to be quiet today with the US holiday. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.